twisty
Hello all
curves
and welcome
and
back
sharp
to the Walrus
points,
Plays,
compact
some
frames
Binding of
with
Isaac,
multiple
a
weapon
daily run
placements,
as
and
Samson.
most importantly,
Now let's see
variable
how well we
geometry
do
features,
today
which allow them
with
to
our
radically
progression all
transform
the way
when
to
switching
Mega
between
Satan.
operating modes.
I've been
The Vulture Droid
pissing
was
about
perhaps
it a
the
bit
best
earlier
example
today,
of all of these
trying
traits,
to work
and
my
the
way
Sheet
through a
Shark
couple of
considered
the
it their
other
magnum
challenges.
opus.
And I just
Engineering,
failed a
a
run
Sheet
of
Shark
Bloody
company,
Mary, which is
originally
really
had an
disappointing as I
exclusive
got quite
contract
close
with the Trade
to
Federation for the
victory.
production of Vulture Droids.
And I'm very disappointed.
All Vulture Droids were to be
But
built
it
at
is
the
the way
Sheet
that
Shark
it is.
Cathedral factories, as the
Well,
highly
I say
complex
I got all the way
starfighters
into
demanded an
Wound 2,
extreme
and I
level
was
of
feeling
manufacturing
pretty confident
precision.
with myself.
During the
but,
Clone Wars, Howard
of course,
Chal and the Sheet Shark
starting
continued to
with
manufacture
half a
Vulture
heart,
Droids
it's very
now
difficult
for the
to
CIS as a
survive.
whole, but due to increased demand,
Unfortunately,
the
it did
Confederacy began
disappoint me
outsourcing
somewhat,
some of
but
its Vulture
I
Droid
will
production to
There's
Backtoid
not
Armor
much else I
Workshop.
can do about it.
Over the course of the war,
And
Backtoid
of course,
steadily
it's
took
me
over
trying to
Vulture
play
Droid
through
production,
on my
much
second
to the displeasure
playthrough.
of the Shitarians. By
It's
the
not
end
really
of the
like an
war,
account,
Backtoid
it's
was
like
producing
I've got
most, if not all, of the Confederacy's
two
new Vulture
profiles.
Droids,
I mean, of course,
especially
you've got
after
3
Charos
profiles
4 fell to the
standard,
Republic
and I just
during the
happen to
Outer
have
Rim
another one
sieges.
that I'm about
The Vulture Droid consisted of
70%
a flat,
complete on.
semicircular main fuselage,
the best way of
topped
putting
with a
it. I would like
teardrop-shaped
to
head
get
and
better on it,
flanked by
but,
2 pairs
that's
of
the way it is.
elongated
Now, I've
shell-like
taken
winglets,
Libre,
which tapered
mostly
to points at
because it's
either end.
going to
Measuring
give me
just
some
3.5 meters
all
end to
around.
end, Vulture Droids were incredibly
But
compact, and
the
they were
big
also
trade-off
very
really
versatile due to their
from the
variable
fact that it
geometry,
is a little
which
bit
allowed them to
arse
switch
my
between 3 main modes.
increasing of
In
damage,
2 of these modes,
so I better hope
the
that I can
droid's
get
head
something
sat
dumb
fixed in
like
place
soy
in a
milk.
dorsal socket,
That
while the
would be
winglets
amazing.
were
If I can
arrayed
get that, then I'll
horizontally,
be all over
their
it.
tips pointing
Okay,
forward.
some health
In
up.
flight
What's
mode,
this one do?
the 2 winglets on either
Okay,
side were
magician.
locked together, and the fighter's
Might be good.
wing-mounted laser cannons
It
were
might be.
retracted. When the Vulture
Hopefully
droids
will be.
switched to attack mode, the wings would snap open and the cannons would be
Obliterate you as
deployed.
well.
This concealed some of the Vulture droids'
I will
weapons
come back
when
and
not
grab
in
that.
attack mode, and it also shielded the cannons from atmospheric
Run any
damage
risks,
and
and what I will
micro-meteorite
also do
impacts.
is if I can get another 3
The Vulture droid could
sets,
also
I'm
land
going to
and
purchase
enter
the
warp
blue
mode,
map.
in which the droid's head would
that
extend
makes
forward on a strut, and
sense
its
to me.
wings would become 2
Because, yes.
pairs of scissor-like legs.
Now, come here.
In warp
Get back
mode,
out.
blade-like claws would extend
Well,
from the droid's
okay, I've
wings.
taken a bit of extra damage
These were
and there's some more
magnetized to allow
bombs.
Vulture droids to cling
good.
to the hulls of capital
And
ships,
I've got a
and they were
feeling that's
also
probably a
equipped with
secret wall.
shock absorbers. This
I
mode
was
allowed
wrong.
Vulture droids to double
Oh,
as
dear.
ground-based patrol
I'm going to
walkers,
try and
similar
double
in
check and
performance to
figure
the
out,
Republic
because I do need a little bit more money if I can.
increasing their utility.
May have to blow up some
When in warp
jars.
mode, Vulture droids
That's
bore
also
a strong resemblance to their G-Charming creators.
There we go. So we're
But due
just
to their
deflecting
extremely
shots
compact
currently.
design, the Vulture droids
Well, I
lacked
walked
onboard
straight
power
into that one
generators.
like a switch.
Instead, they depended on
At least
built-in
my damage
power
has
cells,
gone up a
which
bit
lined
now
the
to
front edge of the main
4.18.
fuselage.
And
These
what
power
I really
cells
want
were
to do is I
good
want to
for
find
2
a
days
pill
continuous
and
operation before they needed to be
placebo.
recharged. In
And I want
flight,
that pill to be
Vulture
range
droids
up.
also required
Because
solid
that one,
fuel concentrate slugs
if I can
to
just keep
generate
pumping
thrust.
range up
These
into
dense
myself,
fuel
then I will
slugs
get
burned incredibly hot when
significantly
ignited,
better.
and they allowed the Vulture droids
course,
to
that does
achieve
require
breakneck
some,
speeds with
specific
minimal
joy
engine
on
mass.
that one.
But
So
they were
let's see what's in
unconventional,
our
expensive to manufacture,
crackjacks.
and they also burned out quickly.
I'll live.
Stock Vulture droids could only stay in flight for 35 minutes before they had to return to their carriers
I'm
to
gonna
refuel,
see if we can blow
though modified
up
variants
that.
developed
That's
during the
not
Clone Wars
helpful.
apparently had
Anything
longer
useful
flight
here?
times and thus longer ranges.
No, that would be
To
some
circumvent this
spite.
weakness, the Trade Federation and later the CIS deployed their Vulture droids in timed rotating
I don't
swarms,
think we're
which
gonna
would be
get
staggered to ensure continuous
opportunity
coverage during their retreats.
to
For all
get
the
enough,
shortcomings of those fuel slugs,
what
however,
I'm after.
they helped make the Vulture
real
droid
shame.
one of the
Let's put a bomb
fastest and
here.
most agile starfighters of
There
the
we
era.
go. We found a secret.
Propelled by powerful
Well,
twin
we
thrusters
might
mounted to
get
either side of the
3
head,
cents in here.
Vulture
We've got
droids could reach
2 so
atmospheric
far. We're now
speeds of
back
up
at
to
full health, which is
1,200 kilometers per
good.
hour, and even faster speeds in the
And
vacuum of
half a
space.
heart.
Thanks to
There
sophisticated,
we go.
highly
Now we've got
precise
enough.
electromagnetic
Yes, I
thrust
have now
vectoring
blitzed
systems,
through all my
Vulture
bombs,
droids were also
but now I can
exceptionally
purchase
maneuverable,
this.
and since they were droids,
In
they
fairness,
could
I
pull
could
off
also
maneuvers that
buy
would kill an organic
this.
pilot, allowing Vulture droids to
There we go.
easily
That
outmaneuver
would be
any
pretty good.
meatbag operated craft.
Of course, I now need some
An
bombs because I
anti-gravity
should have
generator
purchased another one.
located
But
just in front of the
that's
head,
fine.
and a
I'll have
set
to
of
miss out on
repulsive
the
projectors
secret
built into the
passage,
wings
super
also
secret
allowed the
room
Vulture
on
droids
this
to
floor.
hover above the ground
And
perform
hope that we
smooth,
can find some
fuel-efficient
bombs
takeoffs
for the
to
next
landings.
floor.
As a droid starfighter, the
It'll
Vulture
do.
droid lacked the cockpit, and it was operated
go.
by an integrated droid brain housed in the
Here we go.
starfighter's head. The original
Right.
orders of vulture droids made for the
So,
Trade
we don't wanna go
Federation
to
were
the
dependent on a
right. Well, we do,
battleship-based
but we
central
can't
control
really
computer
talk
to
about that.
operate, to the point
And
that
I've
they
also
would
got to be
self-destruct if they lost
very
contact with the computer. But the Vulture droids seen during the Clone Wars
although I
have been
can
upgraded with
take
fully
additional
autonomous
damage
droid
from
brains.
the fact that I have
These droid
skeleton
brains
heart,
were less creative
until I
than
find
organic
some
pilots
heart
and
on
slow to react
floor,
to
I
unexpected
can't really
developments,
risk it.
but they
And
were
the other
generally
problem is, well,
competent
I've
and
taken a
programmed with a
slight
wide variety of
dip in
dogfighting
damage going
maneuvers.
down from 3.5
Vulture droids may
to
not have been the most
3.23.
intelligent droids in the CIS, but they were good enough to match the average
Supremely
organic
terrible.
pilot.
But
Additionally,
yeah.
Clone Wars era Vulture
fine.
droids could still be governed by central
let's
control
blow that up.
computers, which could
What's in
micromanage
here?
entire swarms of fighters,
Well,
providing them with coordination
can you give
comparable
me
to that
something
produced
useful,
by
my
Jedi
friend?
battle meditation.
Yes,
Alongside
that
the
is quite
fighter's
useful.
droid brain and its
it's gonna
control
take it
signal
here.
antenna, the head of the
check
Vulture
and
droid
see.
contained a variety of sensors,
That's not
including
what I wanted
visual
to do.
photoreceptors, magnetic imaging sensors, and long
Well,
wavelength
it looks like
radiation
we're going to
sensors,
lose our
all of which
skeletal
were
heart
housed
now.
behind the droid's glowing
We did
yellow
get
eyes.
Guppy's collar, but
Vulture
now we're
droids
in
lacked
a
shield
little bit of a
generators, and they were
risky
lightly
business right
armored
now,
as
because
well,
I don't
plated with a
have
light,
any
non-magnetic alclad
bombs. I
alloy.
can't get that.
Consequently, they couldn't take all that much damage, and they had to rely on their
desperately
maneuverability
not
to
to take
survive in
damage.
combat.
But I failed.
But the droids
so
weren't really designed for
maybe I should have
survivability
explored a little
anyway.
bit further.
They were designed to
before
be
I
deployed
came
in
up
large
here.
numbers, which would render
That would make
individual
sense.
casualties generally
Ooh,
meaningless.
I mean, the ladder would be
While
nice,
Vulture droids
but
didn't have much in the way of defenses, though, they certainly weren't lacking for weaponry. The primary weapons of the Vulture droid were a
amazing.
set of 4 rapid-firing light
do,
laser
but
cannons
it's not
built into the
amazing.
bases of the wings.
you need some bombs.
These cannons could only be
Desperately,
fired in
desperately need
attack
some
mode,
bombs.
and on top of their
if I
high
can
rate
get
of
some
fire, they had
bombs, then I
exceptional
can
accuracy,
hopefully,
allowing them to
fingers
tear
crossed,
up enemy craft quickly and efficiently. The Vulture droid also
unleash
boasted a pair of
some
energy torpedo launchers,
silliness
which were integrated into the main
So now I've got
fuselage
enough to
in front of
buy
the
the
pit.
ladder.
These fired energy
That could be
torpedoes,
really useful.
bundles of explosive plasma
We'll see how
that
well
had a
that goes.
yield
But I
similar
need
to
some
a
bombs
conventional
again. I know I
torpedo.
keep ranting on about
These were
bombs,
unguided and their
something
launches had a slow
desperately
recharge rate, but they gave the Vulture droid additional firepower,
okay,
which
Guppy's
was meant
collar's
for
also really
softening
useful
up
generally because
well-shielded
it does
stun
give
fighters.
me a
The Vulture droid's energy
increased
torpedo
likelihood
launchers
of,
could also function as
gives me
secondary
an
laser
opportunity to
cannons,
come back
and
from
they
the
were the
dead,
droid's primary
potentially.
weapons
I
when
think
it
it's
was
about a
in warp mode.
50% chance each
Clone
time
Wars era
I
Vulture
die.
droids also had hard
Not
points on
100%
the
on
insides
that
of their winglets
But I
for
think
additional
it's-
munitions, such
it's
as
not
concussion
anything
missiles or
outrageous.
Buzz droid Discord missiles.
Now
They
I am
could
going
carry
to
a maximum of
check.
4
I'm going to fight the
missiles at
boss.
a time.
If we
These
get a
were
devil
generally
deal, which
deployed
I'm very
against
much
enemy fighters,
unlikely
and they could
to
only be
get.
fired when the Vulture droid
If we
was in
get one,
attack
and if
mode.
there's flight,
All told, this
I'm
array of
tempted to
weaponry
take it.
gave the Vulture droid
at the
firepower
same time,
far
we could
beyond
just
its
ignore it and
class
hope
size.
for the angel
Vulture
deals as
droids
well.
were stored in
If I do
dense,
get flight
high
in any
voltage
way, shape, or
recharge
form,
grids
then I
suspended
will
in the rafters of
ignore,
their mothership's hangar,
the
where
ladder,
their fuel
because
slugs
there's no
could be
bloody point to
quickly
it,
replaced
because
and
I
their
can
power
just
cells could recharge.
take whatever I
Dormant
need.
Vulture droids typically
From
ran
this?
system
Okay,
checks while they recharged, periodically
That wasn't
flexing
very
their
clever
wings
of me,
and
was it? So
adjusting
there's
their
no
heads,
devil deal
which meant
chance
that a
now.
flight of Vulture droids in their
Well, we've got another
recharge racks
skeletal
looked
heart
similar
again,
to a
so
swarm
that's
of bats
good.
clinging to the roof of a cave.
Now I
In
need
combat,
to not
Vulture
take
droids could be
damage.
deployed directly from these
the
racks,
next floor.
but Separatist
Well,
commanders usually
I
kept
need to
some
not
of their
lose the
Vulture
skeletal
droids
heart.
active in walk mode while awaiting
I'm
combat,
gonna take
having
that.
them patrol their hangars or the hulls
Now,
of their
of course, the other
carriers on
problem
foot.
is
Since this
I mean,
didn't
I've got 4
exhaust the
sets.
droids'
It's
fuel
not enough for me to
reserves,
do
and since this
anything.
meant that the droids were alert,
So,
could take off easily,
let's
and could
see.
assist hangar personnel
I mean, I
in
might get a
suppressing
couple
boarding
bombs out of
actions,
this guy.
this was much more efficient
bit of
than
money.
having them patrol in flight mode.
Not quite what I was
During
after,
the Clone
but,
Wars, the commanders of many
that's fine.
Separatist flagships usually kept a few
That's
squadrons of
fine.
Vulture droids on the hull for deployment
Come
as
on.
alert fighters.
Unless you're going to give me a soul
Vulture
heart, that's
droids
not
were
enough.
originally intended to be carried
Come on.
into battle aboard the Trade Federation's converted Lucrehulk class
Shit, okay,
battleships,
we've got
which could carry
3 more
750
attempts now.
of the droids in each of their main hangars
No.
for a total of
Kind of
1,500
anticipated
per
that one.
battleship. During the Clone Wars,
And again.
Lucrehulk
Nope.
battleships still served as
else?
the primary
Hearts.
carriers for Vulture droids, but other Separatist capital
Eternal
ships
heart.
carried
Okay,
them as
I'll
well,
happily
most
have that.
notably Providence class carrier
Would it be nice to have a bomb,
which could
though?
carry at least
Ooh, come on, please give
120
me a
Vulture
bomb.
droids each. Additionally,
Okay,
the
well,
Vulture droids' magnetic
that's
landing
another
cores meant
heart.
that flights of the droid
So I'll have
fighters could
5.
hitch
That's
rides
pretty
aboard
good.
Separatist ships that didn't have starfighter
So,
hangars, such as Munificent
go,
class
let's
star
go.
frigates and Recusant class
head to
light
left.
destroyers.
And drop
Vulture
down
droids
a
would
floor.
cling to the support beams that held up the exterior
go.
armor plates of these warships, magnetically locking to the
Let's
girders
see.
for travel through hyperspace.
I want to go to
Regardless
the
of their
right,
carrier
I
type,
think.
Vulture droids were typically deployed in large
So this should
swarms
work
known
out
as
okay.
flights,
Should
which would
be able
overwhelm
to
and
work.
outmaneuver enemy fighters
Now, of course,
before
we've got our
shredding
little
them with their laser
teratoma of
cannons.
spider
In
spawning.
They were first
that's,
deployed by the Trade Federation at Naboo in
just walk into
32
enemies with it.
BBY
I can't remember
after
it's
months of intensive
the
testing
method in which
on
it comes
remote
back.
Trade Federation controlled
As in,
worlds.
I know that it does.
In both the
but I can't
invasion and
remember
subsequent
the
Battle of Naboo,
specifics
the Vulture droids performed
of it
well
doing doing
and
so.
destroyed many Naboo starfighters,
Which is, you know,
though
fine. I
their
just
performance
wish
was
I
a
knew.
little sluggish due to the central control computer being overtaxed. However, it ultimately made little difference as the Trade Federation was ultimately defeated. Despite this failure, the Trade Federation continued to use Vulture droids as their primary starfighters after the Battle of Naboo, and then the Trade Federation pooled its military forces with those of other corporate factions to create the CIS droid army. It contributed its Vulture droids to the Separatist cause as well. Vulture droids saw plenty of action throughout the Clone Wars, beginning with the first Battle of Geonosis, in which swarms of Vulture droids protected the orbiting ring sections of the Trade Federation's battleships from Republic forces. In the early months of the Clone Wars, the Vulture droid was quickly adopted as the Confederacy's primary interceptor class, and Bactoid Armor Workshop began churning out new fighters to augment those being produced by Howard Chal. The Vulture droids in the Confederate Navy were repainted from the standard Trade Federation tan and brown color scheme to Separatist blue and grey, and they became a mainstay of naval battles all over the galaxy. At every point in the Clone Wars, Vulture droids were the most common Separatist starfighter class, fighting in major naval battles above Virajansi, Rendili, Ryloth, Kuro, and Coruscant, among many others. Modified versions with special upgrades were deployed in small numbers in certain theaters, but for the most part, the G-Char's original design continued to hold up, and standard model Vulture droids remained in use until the end of the war. Even after the Confederacy of Independent Systems ceased to exist, Vulture droids would continue to see use from Separatist holdout factions, which deployed them en masse against the forces of the new Galactic Empire. But Vulture droids weren't the only starfighters used by the Trade Federation, however, nor were they the only fighters the Trade Federation contributed to the Separatist cause.
Telepathy for Dummies is pretty
Howard
good.
Chal Engineering produced a bunch of support fighters for the Trade Federation's secret army, many of them oddball craft that only appear in a handful of sources. We don't have much information about any of them, so we're going to discuss both of the relevant ones in a quick lightning round. Alongside Vulture droids and a series of gunships of unknown make, the Trade Federation contributed two of its starfighter classes to the Confederacy, a Scarab class starfighter and an unnamed class of droid bomber. The Scarab class starfighter was the predecessor to the Vulture droid, and it was fairly similar in function and profile to its successor. The Scarab had a flat, elongated body with a shell-like wing mounted on struts to either side. In fly mode, the wings would be pressed flat against the body, but they would spring out in attack mode to unveil the fighter's weapons. Propelled by a single large thruster, the Scarab was much slower and less maneuverable than the Vulture droid, with a maximum atmospheric speed of 900 km per hour. But it made up for this with tougher armor and shield generators. The Scarab class fighter was meant to be operated by a single pilot, typically a droid, though some versions of the fighter were converted into automated droid starfighters instead. Like the Vulture droid, the Scarab was armed with 4 laser cannons housed in the wings. On the whole, the Scarab was able to take more punishment than the Vulture droid, but it was slower and less heavily armed, and the droid pilots that operated original model Scarabs were less competent than integrated droid brains. The Vulture droid far surpassed it in performance, and it quickly took the Scarab's whole role as the Trade Federation's primary starfighter. The Scarab was never completely scrapped, however. The Trade Federation kept a few squadrons of them around, deploying them as heavy interceptors or short-range snub fighters, including against the Lock Revenants. During the Clone Wars, the Trade Federation contributed its remaining Scarab-class starfighters to the Separatist cause. These outdated ships were typically carried aboard Lucrehulk-class battleships, and they saw action in a few engagements over the course of the conflict, most notably the Battle of Kothlis. Then there was the Trade Federation droid
Maybe
bomber.
I shouldn't have bought the map.
These craft appeared to have been based on the Vulture droid, and they were used in limited numbers by the Trade Federation during the Battle of Naboo and in its campaign against the Lock Revenants. The Trade Federation droid bomber was, like the Vulture droid, an autonomous droid starfighter of Shi-Char design. It was much more heavily armored than the Vulture droid, and it was equipped with powerful shields, but it was much slower and had poor maneuverability. The droid bomber was armed with 4 wingtip laser cannons, just like the Vulture droid, and it also featured a high-capacity bomb bay. Typically deployed in squadrons of 5, droid bombers were carried in small numbers by some Lucrehulk-class battleships. Prior to the Clone Wars, the droid bomber was the Trade Federation's primary bomber class. It was typically deployed as air support for ground forces, bombarding hard targets from above,
Well,
though it could
now
also
we've
be
got a
deployed in
lot of
attack runs
HP,
against
a
capital
silly amount of
ships.
HP.
The droid bomber could inflict plenty of damage, but it was
that'll be
quite
nice. That's an
easy to
extra
shoot
item.
down, even with its shields and armor. Nonetheless, the Trade Federation kept using it as its main bomber class, and after the start of the Clone Wars, the CIS began using it as well. However, the advent of much more effective separatist droid bombers meant that the Trade Federation droid bomber didn't see all that much use.
I'm going to use the moon.
Its sole known engagement was at the Battle of Vidarv in 20 BBY.
That's a
But
shame.
the Trade Federation was far from the only contributor to the CIS military, and another of the Confederacy's major backers, the Geonosians, supplied starfighters of their own. The first Geonosian starfighter we'll be discussing today is the better-known one, the Nantex-class territorial defense starfighter, a compact interceptor designed for the use of the Geonosian warrior caste. Also known as the Big-Wing starfighter or simply as the Geonosian starfighter, the Nantex was manufactured by Huplapasa Tisk Shipwrights Collective, a Geonosian industry subsidiary managed by the rulers of the Stelgasen Hive. It was an extremely agile craft, deadly in the hands of the Geonosians' purpose-bred pilots, and though it was originally intended for patrol duties and the defense of Geonosian hives, it was also suited for moderate range attack duties and dogfighting. At just 9.8 meters in length, the Nantex was a small ship with a compact and narrow design. It consisted of 4 modules, which were connected by extremely powerful magnets. The largest were the dorsal and ventral main hull sections, which were rounded at the back and tapered to a needle-thin point at the front.
Let's get rid of these
These were stacked atop each other, with the other 2 sections, the weapons module and the engine module, located between.
Finally, we got a bomb.
The process by which these different modules were built was unique and distinctively Geonosian.
Let's go to the right.
The fighters' internal systems were built first, assembled within a structural endoskeleton, and when complete, the module would be encased in lamina steel. This lamina steel would be superheated and drawn out into long strings, which would be woven around the ship's endoskeleton and left to harden, forming an extremely durable shell that bound the fighters' components together. This lamina steel shell was surprisingly effective at protecting the Nantex from enemy fire. Although lamina steel was fairly lightweight, it wasn't as rigid as most metals. It could subtly bend to absorb kinetic energy from impacts, and it also had energy dispersing properties. These defensive attributes, combined with how well the Nantex's bronze-colored plating blended with the reddish-brown rocks of Geonosis, made this outer coating one of the Nantex fighter's most valuable features. On top of its durable shell, the Nantex was equipped with shields, albeit fairly light ones. The starfighter's main shield generators were located in the base of the fighter's nose, above and below the weapon module, while its shield projectors lined the craft's dorsal and ventral spines. The Nantex class starfighter was operated by a single pilot drawn from the Geonosian specialized pilot subcaste. Geonosian pilots were wingless members of the Geonosian warrior caste, bred for superior reflexes and genetically engineered to not need sleep. As Pupae, Geonosian pilots were paired with a starfighter's flight computer, with which they developed an idiosyncratic rapport. By the time the pilot was fully mature, they had developed a close bond with their fighter's flight computer, such that, in combat, the pilot and their fighter would essentially become a single entity, increasing their effectiveness.
Put a bomb here.
Each Nantex-class starfighter was bonded to a single pilot who would spend their entire life either in the cockpit or on standby in the cob-shaped Geonosian air defense lines. This intensive pilot training regimen meant that Geonosian pilots could fly their fighters as a matter of instinct in spite of the Nantex's complex and intricate control setup. Pilots sat in cramped cockpits located at the aft end of the dorsal hull, and they operated their fighters via a pair of pedals and 4 multi-axis control yokes that required Geonosian dexterity to operate. These cockpits featured bubble canopies with 360-degree visibility, and while they had visual computer readouts for spatial orientation and fire control, most of the feedback the pilot got from their fighter's computer was delivered via a scent simulator mask. These masks generated artificial pheromones to convey status feedback and other critical information, since Geonosians could process pheromones faster than spoken words or visual data. Nantex fighters' scent simulator masks could also be used by Geonosian flight controllers and air marshals to adjust the pilot's mood and relay squadron orders. There was no room for passengers or for more than 50
and the evil eye and
kilograms
the
of
extra
supplies
shots
in
that
the
we're pinging out
Starfighter's cramped
do
cockpit,
seem to be doing
though there
some
were
favours.
full life support
Not
suites
a
packed in
stupid amount
there
of
for the
favours,
pilot's
but it's,
benefit.
you know, I'll
The
take
Nantex
some.
class Starfighter was
Okay, so now
powered
that
by an
means the
onboard
gold
main
room
reactor,
and the
which took up
shop
almost the
are over
entire
to
after
the
portion of the ventral hull,
bottom
along with
right.
the ship's power converters,
Let's
ventral
see what
fuel
we can
tanks, and landing gear.
down
This
here.
reactor was connected directly to the Starfighter's engine module, which lay between the two hulls at the aft end of the
Dead.
ship. The Geonosians made a number of engine module variants, including a more powerful booster engine version, but most fighters were equipped with the stock engine module, which contained a pair of thrusters
I'm
housed
sure you know
in a
exactly what
single
we're
engine
purchasing.
orb. These
My
thrusters
favourite
were
item in the
small,
game
but they
ever.
were
We're having
obscenely
all the
powerful
trinkets
due to the
today.
Nantex's highly efficient
Oh,
engine
I'm a
design.
happy boy.
As a consequence, the Starfighter could reach speeds of
let's blow up some of these and hope that
1,250
we actually
kilometers
get
per hour
the
in atmosphere,
penny out of
and it could accelerate at up
it's
to
an unlikely
4,500 G in
but it would
open
be
space.
really helpful.
The Nantex was also
that's fine.
exceptionally maneuverable, primarily due to
what
the
we're gonna do
unique
is we're
design
gonna
of its
smelt
engine module. The engine orb was
that to
connected to
ourselves.
the
We've now got
reactor and the
two
propellant
trinkets
tanks by a
associated with
complex
us.
system of flexible lines, which
And
allowed it
now,
to rotate within its
I'm going to
socket
use
to
the Queen of
adjust the
Hearts
direction of thrust streams.
Okay, we've got
The
6
Starfighter's
hearts.
array of
1,
small tractor beam generators,
2,
which we'll discuss more in a bit,
3,
also improved its maneuverability,
4,
making constant minor adjustments to the Starfighter's
5.
trajectory.
Okay, so you've now got
All
a
of these
decent chance
factors
of an
made the
angel
Nantex
reveal,
class
not devil
Starfighter faster
6.
than a Vulture droid and about
beautiful.
as
We've now
maneuverable,
walked our way
with its
into the
performance in
danger deal.
dogfights
Now got
limited
divine
only by the
protection. That is
G-force
beautiful.
tolerances of
The
the pilot.
weird thing is, I don't
It isn't
really
known
want
whether
the eternal
Geonosian
heart. I think
pilots
I've
were
got
more
too
or
many
less durable
hearts
than
right
human
now.
pilots in this regard, though it
What I
certainly
really
seems like
is
they
if I
didn't
could
get
the
dizzy at
potato
least,
peeler.
judging by the way they like to
Remove some
constantly
HP
spin
from
around
myself,
while in
but
combat. A
that's
number
not
of
gonna
secondary
happen. So we're
features
gonna
were
put a bit of
also
money
packed
into
into
you.
the Nantex's narrow
Mostly
frame,
'cause I don't really want the
improving its
card.
versatility in combat performance.
I don't want the deck of cards.
The front end of the engine module
wanna
housed
see what's coming up
powerful
next.
long-range scanners, while the aft
batteries.
portion of the dorsal hull housed communications transceivers
so
and an
didn't get
integrated
enough
flight
on the old
computer,
money front,
which kept the
did we? That's a
Starfighter in
shame.
contact with its hive. The
Oh well,
fighter was equipped
would
with
have
an
been nice to
internal
have the
gravity
9 volt,
generator
but,
and a series of
I
inertial
guess we're not gonna
compensators
get that luck
for the
today.
sake of the
That's
pilot,
okay.
which were
I'll live.
housed within the forward
because
prongs
I've got
of
my
the
trinket
craft.
smelter and I'm a happy,
Both of these
man.
prongs were also lined with miniature
Okay,
tractor
so,
beam projectors,
hopefully we
which
can
played a
get a few
unique
kills
role in
here,
how the
and
Nantex
if we
operated.
do get a few good
In total,
kills,
the
we
Nantex
can
class
then ping out the
Starfighter
old
featured 100
power of
independently
death.
targeted narrow beam tractor repulsor projectors, 25 on
yeah, I'm
either
at my
side
maximum,
of either prong.
because I haven't got birth
These
right.
could subtly adjust the Starfighter's
Okay, well that's
trajectory
pretty
for
good. I'll take
increased
some
maneuverability,
rounds for some
adjust the
extra
path of the
damage
craft's weapons
speed.
fire
So
to
we got
improve
a
accuracy,
general
and they could
across
even
the
grab
board
onto
stat
enemy
up,
craft
which
if
is
the
good,
Nantex
and
got
that's
close enough,
really all I can hope for
hampering
right now.
target's maneuverability
just some
and making it
stats
easier for the pilot
up.
to land a kill shot.
Let's blow this up.
Contrary to what some have claimed, those bugs could indeed aim. And their starfighters practically had built-in aim assist to make it easier. Along with these tractor beam projectors,
as we take
the Nantex
damage,
was armed
we
with a
will
single main
also,
weapon,
thankfully,
mounted in the Starfighter's midships weapons module.
We'll also thankfully be able
Specifically,
to
beak wings were
increase
armed
the
with a
radius
single
of
long-barreled laser cannon, which fired amethyst-colored
holy
bolts.
effect. So
These
we've got a
guns
little
were
bit of
extremely accurate and
bit of a
quite
boost.
powerful,
Now,
rated
I
at
don't
10
have- I
trillion
don't think I've had
joules
enough
per
right
shot.
I did not
and like
have
the
enough.
Nantex's
Let's get some
thrusters,
words
they
out
were
of my
mounted in a
mouth
socket that
to
gave the turret a fairly wide axis
a
of rotation,
likely,
allowing the Starfighter to make shots at extreme angles.
arcade,
Like
which
with
is
the
fine.
engine
It's
module,
just a bit of a
weapons
shame.
modules for Nantex
But if
class
I can get
starfighters were
an arcade,
modular,
which
allowing
doesn't
the
look
fighters'
like it,
laser cannons to be swapped out for ion cannons
Got a
or
feeling that I
advanced
don't
scanner
really
suites
want to
if
go
need
all the
be,
way this way,
though
especially
this
since I
wasn't
don't
done all
have
that
bombs, so I
commonly.
can't blow that secret wall up.
Nantex class starfighters were typically stored in Geonosis's
That's a
air
shame
defense
you died, my
hives,
little friend.
where squadrons
Oh, I
of
could
the
have walked
fighter were
across
kept
that way
on
more
constant
sensibly,
alert status, ready
But
to
again,
be launched
I'm an
at a
idiot.
moment's
So there
notice
we go,
to
you're
defend the
dead.
hive
No, I
against
could
marauding
sacrifice
protectors
one of the
or
skeletal hearts.
unwelcome off-worlders. In these hives,
I don't
Nantex
really
fighters were
want
locked
to, but
into
I
sets of
could.
docking clamps along the hive walls.
To get a soul heart.
Recharge
instead.
cables, blaster gas hoses, and propellant
Don't
tubes would
want
be
to do
hooked
that. Not
up
unless
to
I get
ports along
Guppy's
the aft
body or
half of the
something
starfighter, refilling all its consumables, while the aft part of the
not
dorsal
that
hull would pop open to allow access to the cockpit. The Nantex's landing gear meant that it could land at other hangars or on the
that
Geonosian
was a
surface,
little bit
but it had to
close.
return to an air defense hive or to a specially outfitted capital ship to
Holy
refuel.
damage.
At most,
I mean,
they would
the
have to
cigarette
do so
lighter is
after
not
2
going to
days
do
of
much.
continuous operation, as their consumables wouldn't last long
But
beyond
it's
that
useful
point.
to have.
Consequently, the
It
Nantex
just does
class
a little bit of
starfighter
extra
was a short to
Now,
medium
I
range
do
interceptor.
need to find
It was
a
designed to be able
heart.
to make it to orbit and
That's
operate
not a heart.
independently within the Geonosian ring system, but since it wasn't hyperspace
But again,
capable,
I could
it couldn't travel far
sacrifice
beyond that.
that skeletal
In
heart.
larger battles, the Nantex was meant to be deployed in
not really
pairs,
the end of the
squadrons,
world,
or groups as space
don't
superiority
really want the
fighters,
glass cannon.
or more commonly
It's a fun
aerial
item.
superiority fighters.
It's one of those
It
items
was
that
also
is
capable of
amazing
carrying out
if you're
patrol,
playing as
escort,
Lost.
and short-range recon
Like,
duties.
hands down, it's phenomenal.
It was similar in
Other
capability
characters,
and
it's
mission
not
profile
quite
to
as
the Vulture
good.
droid.
I would
The
personally
Nantex was
suggest.
much tougher and could operate for longer,
Well,
but it
let's
had
open
less
these up
firepower and
and
came in
see
smaller
what
numbers
range
than
lock
its
up.
autonomous
That's
counterparts.
good. So range
It also had a few
is going
advantages
to
on
translate
tone
into
turf that other
generally
starfighters
stats all
lacked.
over, because
In particular,
range is slightly
it could
better, I
function
find.
in a stealth role in
Because
Geonosis,
range
since its
has
bronze hull
would tend to
blended in
be
with the
the higher
environment,
of the
and its
stats that
engines
you'll
had a
get
minimal
from
emissions
it.
profile.
So
All in
you
all,
actually
the
want
Nantex class
more
territorial
range.
defense starfighter was an engineering marvel,
I
one of the
think I'm
deadliest
going
craft in the
to
whole
fly into
Separatist
that
arsenal.
cursor and
However,
then I'm going
its
to-
use during the Clone Wars was fairly limited. This was for two reasons.
Yeah, I think then once I
First,
fly in,
the Geonosians had only
unless I get
ever
hard here.
manufactured
There
the
we go,
Nantex
that's
for
good.
their
So
own
fly
use,
in,
not for export.
and then not
second,
lose the skeleton
the Confederacy
heart,
had
that's good.
plenty of other fighters that could fill its niche
and
well
you're
enough.
going to die as well.
The Geonosians did contribute
Noodles.
some Nantex starfighters to the Separatist arsenal,
And
some
they
of
need
them
more money. I
modified to
did
be
want
operated
another
by
couple
droid pilots
cents,
instead of
really.
Geonosians, but they were greatly
let's
outnumbered by
fly.
most other Separatist starfighter classes.
Really?
For the most part, Nantex starfighters were only seen on Geonosis
But I'll
itself,
still
or
take
in the
the
fighter
extra
wings
5
of the
cents.
CIS
That'll be
Navy's
something
handful
to
of
have.
Geonosian capital ships. As you might expect, the
what was in
Nantex
the shop
did see
anyway? What was
extensive
it that I
use
wanted?
in both
yes.
battles of Geonosis.
Better loot.
During the
Chest
first
loot
battle of
and
Geonosis,
2
the
extra
Republic's assault ships bombarded
We're
the
not gonna
Geonosians'
have
air
a
defense hives from
spike
orbit
room.
before most of their
No
fighters could
sacrifice
launch,
room.
and as a result,
By then,
only a
so
handful of these
fine.
agile craft participated in the battle.
Let's,
This allowed the Republic to maintain
push that
air
button.
superiority, and it
got
won the
some
battle as a result.
marbles.
The Geonosians learned the lesson of this defeat all
That's a shame.
too
It would
well.
have been nice if something
In the
could have
second
turned up,
battle of
but
Geonosis,
no,
they
no.
deployed swarms of Nantex
What would be
class
really good right
starfighters
now is,
before the
of course,
Republic could
a
shell their
trinket.
hives, and these fighters
That's what I really
inflicted
want.
staggering
All the trinkets.
casualties on
And
loyalist
let's get rid of
forces
these
in the
flies.
early stages of the
Grab
battle.
that heart.
During the
just
first
so
few
we
months
don't
of the
end up
Clone Wars,
injuring
Nantex class
ourselves.
starfighters
Again,
saw
loads of
sporadic
keys.
use on
Loads and
other
loads of
fronts
keys.
across the galaxy, most notably
Right,
during the
well,
campaigns
the
of
aura
Severan's
effect of my
Tongue,
holy
the
damage
Battle of
is just
Pingalan
doing
4, and the
fantastic
Battle of
damage there.
Munich.
Look at that. That's
After Munulance, their use quickly declined.
Okay, so we've
but
now
the
got
Nantex
our very
did
first
continue
down
to
deal.
see action until
Finally.
the end of the war,
Let's actually see what's
participating
available.
in late war battles above Duro
Neither of
and
which I
Balderrama.
actually really want.
The Commerce Guild also
Down we
developed
drop.
a fleet patrol craft based on
now
the
we got
design of
ourselves,
the Nantex, which it used
guess
to
half
defend its
decent
mining outposts
angel deal
during
chance
the
for
war,
this floor.
though the specifications of this variant of the
24%,
fighter are
so we're
unknown.
gonna head left
The
first.
Geonosians also contributed a second class of
flamey,
starfighter to the
flamey,
Separatist cause. It was
Again, the cigarette
manufactured
light is
in limited
doing
numbers, but the few that
vaguely
were made
proud.
had a
Ears down,
significant
I don't really
impact
wanna
on the
do it.
Clone Wars. This craft was the Genevex class
Let's kill you,
fan-blade
shall we?
starfighter, several of which served as the
Ow.
personal starfighter of Asajj Ventress. These agile, eye-catching
I mean, it's
craft
not
featured
much, but at least I've got a
exotic
bomb.
solar sail technology, similar to the
bombs.
Gree solar sail that was incorporated into Count Dooku's personal
maybe.
starship, and though they were rare, they were some
Well,
of
we're
the
getting rid
most
of these guys
fearsome
slowly,
fighters
surely.
in
The
the
flames
Separatist
again,
arsenal.
It's
Hupla
nothing
Passatis
reliable. I
manufactured a
think it's
total
probably
of
the best way of
6
putting the cigarette lighter.
fan-blade
It's not
starfighters for
reliable
Count
damage,
Dooku, who later
but
gave
it
a number
is
of them to
reasonably
Asajj Ventress
consistent,
as a
like,
gift. The
an
fighters were
enemy will
each 13 meters long,
probably
and they
be set
consisted
on
of a
fire by it,
spherical
and
cockpit
therefore
module at the front of the
that's some
craft,
general damage.
two adjacent engine
I do
modules
really
that
wanna see if I
extended
can
back
get
to
the
each side,
potato. If I can
and a
get the
pair of
potato
large
here.
booms tipped with laser cannons that swung
Then we'll
out
be in a
above
really good
and below
place,
the
I
cockpit,
think.
with the ship's
Because
distinctive
of the
fan
potato
stretched
peel, I
between
can
them
remove
at the
maybe
aft.
4,
During
maybe
atmospheric
even 5
flight,
halves.
landing and takeoff and
That'll
hyperspace
put me in a
jumps,
much
the
better
booms would
place
swing
in,
back to a
you know,
horizontal
once I have an
orientation,
opinion.
closing the
We're
fan
going to add
to
that
protect it
to
against
ourselves.
damage.
We've now got
The
3
fan-blade
trinkets
solar
added
sail
to my
fan served a
collection,
number of different purposes.
which is a
It could
permanent
function as a
state of being,
conventional
as I'm sure
solar
anyone who's
sail,
followed any of my
propelling the
streams
starfighter
and
through space,
playthroughs
but more
before
importantly,
is very
the
well aware
exotic
of it.
material of
I'm
the
a
fan acted as an
whole
energy transmission plane,
trinkets.
allowing it to serve as a deflector shield amplifier. When the fan blades' deflector shields were active and the fan was unfurled, this little ship could take an extraordinary amount of punishment, making it nigh impossible to shoot down. There were drawbacks to the fan as well. It could only be active in open space.
We'll see.
And the enormous energy
Anyway,
output of
let's
its
go.
deflector shield amplification made the fan blade stand out like a
wasn't
beacon
very
on the
clever of
sensors
me,
of
I'm
other
not gonna
ships. But for a pilot as
Okay,
skilled
so I
as
now
Asajj
have
Ventress,
lost,
the trade-offs were worth it. The Jinevex was propelled by a pair of
little bit
powerful
of,
thrusters mounted at the ship's
stuff I really
aft
need not to
end,
do, so
which were
that's
connected
okay.
to
We're gonna grab
air
that soul
scoops on
heart.
either side of the cockpit for use in atmospheric
I don't know
flight.
if there's any others.
These
I mean,
could
yes,
propel the fan
technically
blade at
there is
speeds of
that
up to
black heart, which I
1,250
probably should have
kilometers per
grabbed.
hour in atmosphere, roughly as fast as the Geonosian Nantex.
Oh
These
dear.
engines featured ion bafflers
annoying.
that greatly reduced the fan blade's emissions profile.
Okay,
This meant that the fan blade was difficult to detect when the ship's
why
fan
is
was
that
retracted,
balked?
which was useful for stealth missions. The fan blade was also hyperspace
idea what this is
capable,
gonna
and its
be.
hyperdrive was rated as a Class 1, which was
Is it
faster
gonna give
than
me
the
Godhead
Republic's
effect? 'Cause
Arc
it looks like there's
170s.
Godhead in there.
Its Navi computer
No,
was
but it did give
limited,
me
however,
some-
with memory for only 5 jumps. The Jinevex
seemed
had
to
a
be permanent
fairly
stat
small
boosts.
cockpit, which was positioned at the
I
front
mean,
end of
in
the
that
craft.
case,
This cockpit had a large bubble canopy,
Let's
allowing
charge
the
it up if we
pilot a
can.
wide field of view, and it featured
Oh,
full
hang on.
life support systems. The Jinevex required only a single pilot,
I mean, it
and
seems
unlike
to
the
be
Nantex, it had
giving me
controls that any
stats
humanoid
every
pilot
run.
could operate. The
Okay,
fan
no
blade's
more.
cockpit was only intended to carry
That's
the
a real
pilot
shame.
and 50 kilograms of supplies.
I mean, it's,
However, with some
it's
effort,
definitely
the passenger
weird.
could be crammed
Did
into
it
the
give me a
cockpit
black
as
heart
well. Additionally, Ventress had at least one of her fan blades modified to carry 18 A-series assassin droids in external
that would be
modules along the
useful.
main fuselage. This modified fan blade, the
that's
last
not so
call,
helpful.
also sported a prototype
Okay,
gem
so it
cutter
only was
sensor
it's
that
only giving
allowed
me
the ship
stats
to
now
detect
when I'm
when a craft was
carrying it.
about to come out of hyperspace, roughly 5 seconds in advance, which was all the time a Force user like Ventress needed. Fan blade starfighters were armed with
Not a
2
clue.
formidable dual laser cannons, which were mounted at the ends of the fighter's
still
vertical
kinda wanna
booms,
carry
giving
my
them a broad
smelter,
field of fire.
because I love the smelter.
These guns had a high rate of fire and exceptional accuracy,
Yeah, okay, we lost a little
similar
bit
to the
out of it,
main
but
cannon of the
I'll be
Nantex.
fine.
Together,
I have
they had
no idea what it's
sufficient
actually
firepower
doing,
to be able to
so
destroy virtually any starfighter.
No, I
They
say
could even
risk it.
puncture the whole
I think it's
plane
more
with
the I have
capital
no idea what
ships.
it actually will
This
do.
last capability allowed the
Whereas I know
Jinevex to
what
serve
this
in a
will
variety
do
of
for me,
roles.
and
It
that's
could be deployed as an interceptor,
better
a
for me, I
long-range
think.
snubfighter, a stealth-capable scout, or
Jump on down.
multi-purpose starfighter.
We've got
with a
shots on the
long
next set of
operational
floors,
range,
so that's
high
good at
survivability,
least.
and substantial firepower.
And
Of the
we
6
seem to have
Jinevex
a
class starfighters that the
mind effects
Geonosians
now.
originally made for Dooku,
Not
4
sure
were given to
why.
Asajj Ventress,
Not upset.
who
Oh,
stored
wow,
and
that's a lot of
maintained them at
kills.
her castle on
please be a
Ratatak.
good kill.
Ventress
Yes,
piloted her
that's a
original
very
fan
good
blade in the
kill.
Battle of Munilance, using it to destroy
that is a
several
stat
squadrons
up
of
kill, and I
V-19
want
Torrents,
all the
engage
stats
Anakin
up.
Skywalker in a
All the
dogfight,
benefits.
and ultimately lure the young Padawan
that
away
worked.
to Yavin 4, where she attempted to kill him in a lightsaber duel. Skywalker won that battle, however, and he stole Ventress's ship after defeating her, returning to Munilance
Tears
Inn.
up again. So it's not
Dooku gave
much
Ventress
in the
another
way
fan
of
blade to replace
stats
it,
up,
but
it's
just a few
something
months
else.
later,
Tears down
the ship
hill.
was stolen by Obi-Wan Kenobi, who used it to escape Ventress's castle
Need
on
some help.
Ratatak.
Need some help,
Ventress's
because I
third
don't want
fan
to
blade,
die.
the last call, lasted longer,
Well,
and
more than
Ventress
one.
had
I
it
want to
extensively
maintain my ability
modified,
to get an
as we
angel
mentioned
heal.
earlier. Ventress piloted
since
the
there's only
last
gonna be a
call in many
limited
engagements with
amount of
Republic
opportunities to
forces,
get angel heals.
even
We've got
killing
this floor
Jedi
and
pilots
next
with
floor.
it, but she
Unless-
ultimately lost the ship during a
No, health
battle
down.
at the Findar spaceport. Prior to this engagement, she
Range
had been
down.
holding Peleus Chuff, an actor who had served as a
Boom.
decoy for Yoda, as prisoner. But Chuff had managed to
put a bomb
escape while
there.
Ventress was distracted, and he programmed the call to
That's
self-destruct.
fantastic. Tears
Dooku
up.
eventually gave
So
Ventress
tears
a
are at
fourth fan blade,
maximum
which she
now, so
used
that
in the
means I
Battle of
definitely
Selast
need to find
midway
some
through
range
the
up
war,
kills and a
only for
stack
this
of them.
Jinevex to be shot down by Anakin Skywalker shortly before Dooku betrayed Ventress and attempted to have her
sucked.
killed. Ventress
grab
escaped
that
the
for
subsequent destruction of her command ship aboard her fan blade, but the Starfighter was
again, we've got this
critically
slight issue
damaged in the
with
process,
you.
and Ventress would
I
never
don't know those
pilot
legs, right?
another.
They always do me a mischief.
One of the remaining
That's
two
another
fan blade
trinket added.
starfighters was piloted by another of
And that's
Dooku's
lame.
agents, an officer named Vulpus,
Well, we found-
on a routine inspection of General Grievous's operations
I don't really
in the
want to
Outer
go
Rim.
in there.
It's unknown if the ship belonged to
Not
him
yet.
or whether it was
If
a
I can
loan
get
from
flight,
Dooku.
then
The fate of this
yes.
craft, as well as
I
that
don't
of the
want to
sixth
right
and
now,
final
because I don't really want to
Jinevex,
lose
is
my
unknown.
soul hearts.
But the Geonosians
Was gonna
weren't
be
the
my
only
statement there, but I
separatists
failed
whose
at that.
starfighters saw use in the Clone
Okay.
Wars. The CIS was supported by hundreds of local
on.
planetary security forces with their own established fighter wings,
Blow that up.
which saw action
See what's
against
inside.
loyalist forces in numerous battles over the
Into
course of the
shots
conflict.
for us. That's
Some
as
of these
bad.
were unique starfighter designs
Money.
which saw
I
limited
do like
use
money.
due to protectionism. One example of this was the Umbaran
It's not really
starfighter.
money, but it's
Identified in canon as the Zenwas 33 Umbaran starfighter, and also known as the T-20 fighter, these agile craft were the primary starfighters of the separatist-aligned Umbaran militia, the local military of the planet Umbara. This exotic fighter was one of many examples of the Umbaran's unusual and highly advanced military technology, the secrets of which they kept to themselves. In canon, these craft were stated to have been manufactured by Ghost Armaments, which also produced the Umbaran militia's ground vehicles. Similar to the Geonosian Nantex class fighter, the Umbaran starfighter was meant as a planetary defense interceptor, though it could also function as an assault snub fighter. The Umbaran starfighter had what could be generously described as a bizarre design. Out of universe, it was apparently modelled on the cervical vertebra of an Apatosaurus. The main body of the craft flared out toward the aft end, with the ship's control chair mounted on its front, encased with an array shield bubble. Two fins protruded from the top of the main section, while two large loop-like wings protruded from the bottom, taking up most of the craft's width of 10.38 meters.
Significant improvement.
These wings folded upwards slightly when the starfighter landed, and since they lacked
the brimstone
visible
blast,
joints, this meant that the hull plating of the Umbaran starfighter had to be incredibly pliable, perhaps to better withstand kinetic energy from enemy fire. The Umbaran starfighter was propelled by an hourglass-shaped set of thrusters on its aft end. The exact nation of its propulsion systems is unknown, but in canon, the Umbaran starfighter is stated to have had a top atmospheric speed of 1,100 kilometers per hour, so they were highly effective. It was also quiet and produced minimal emissions, making the fighter capable of stealth operations. The Umbaran starfighter also had state-of-the-art reaction control systems, which allowed the fighter to rotate in place rather than taking longer turns, even in a planet's atmosphere. This made the craft incredibly maneuverable, no doubt improving its combat performance. The fighter wasn't equipped with a hyperdrive, but it did have shields.
Again, not much, but
the Umbaran starfighter was operated by a single pilot, and like most Umbaran vehicles, it featured holographic controls, which allowed the pilot to control the ship through simple hand gestures. The pilot's seat clung to the front end of the main fuselage, and when the starfighter landed, it detached and floated down to the ground.
It's you.
To take control of the craft, the pilot would simply have to sit in the command chair, following which the holographic controls would activate, a ray shield bubble would form around the chair, and the chair would float back up to dock with the main fuselage, resting on top of the starfighter's plasma cannon.
That'll be fun.
Despite the detached nature and bare-bones design of this ray shield cockpit, the Umbaran starfighter did have life support systems, though they probably wouldn't do the pilot any good if their fighter's shields failed and they wound up exposed to hard vacuum.
Go and explore.
The holographic controls of the Umbaran starfighter were designed according to Umbaran norms, and they were meant to be operated by trained Umbaran militia pilots. But any humanoid could figure them out and fly an Umbaran starfighter, though it could be difficult to get the hang of. The Umbaran starfighter's primary weapon was a chin-mounted, rapid-firing plasma cannon, which functioned similarly to an end-up cannon. This was the fighter's primary weapon for use against enemy starfighters, and it was quite effective, able to mow down scores of infantry and pierce the armor of enemy tanks.
Not much.
The fighter was also armed with a pair of wing-mounted missile pods, which were meant for use against harder targets. These could function as electromagnetic plasma cannons, unleashing devastating blasts of energized plasma that could pierce the shields of even the Umbaran mobile heavy cannon, and they could also be fired as conventional missiles. This heavy weaponry allowed the Umbaran starfighter to participate in assaults on enemy capital ships. All known Umbaran starfighters were housed at surface air bases on Umbara itself, so it's probable that the Umbaran's capital ships could carry them in their hangars as well. They were the only known starfighter model used by the Umbaran militia, and they seemed to be all the militia really needed, as they could function as space superiority fighters and snub fighters. The Umbaran militia deployed these fighters to intercept enemy fighter craft, to form fighter screens for capital ships, to lead attack runs on enemy capital ships, as air support for their ground forces, and likely for more mundane patrol and recon duties as well. Umbaran starfighters were extraordinarily effective, one of the most fearsome starfighter designs to see action during the Clone Wars, and it was fortunate for the Republic that they only participated in one battle, the Battle of Umbara itself. In that battle, Umbaran starfighters fought ferociously against Republic fighter wings in the battle's naval theater, while others provided air support for the Umbaran militia's ground forces. Between the performance of these starfighters and the Umbaran's other advantages, the Republic may well have lost the battle were it not for the initiative of 3 clone troopers from the 501st Legion who commandeered a trio of Umbaran starfighters against the orders of their commanding officer. These 3 troopers used their starfighters to capture an Umbaran airbase and destroy a separatist missile cruiser in orbit, turning the tide of the battle and demonstrating the incredible power of the Umbaran starfighter in the process.
There's only one left.
Now it's time for us to finally move on to the separatist craft that were actually developed during the Clone Wars, rather than in the years leading up to it. And we'll begin with a part of the separatist arsenal that was somewhat undeveloped at the start of the Clone Wars: bombers. On the whole, going into the Clone Wars, the CIS was much better off than the Republic when it came to starfighters. Between the Vulture Droid, the Scarab, and the Nantex, it had plenty of general-purpose fighters and interceptors, which were what separatist fighter doctrines emphasized anyway. But it didn't start out with much in the way of bombers. As we discussed earlier, the Confederacy had the Trade Federation droid bomber, and it also had the Commerce Guild bomber, a bizarre, little-seen craft that we virtually have no information about, but neither of these were
my favorite item.
They did see some action, especially toward the start of the war.
Sacrifice it for
Severance 10 was known for deploying Commerce Guild bombers alongside Nantex fighters on her campaigns.
If I do find another trinket that I really, really
clear that new designs were needed.
I can go and grab
one such new design, the Drop Fighter, entered use as a heavy bomber, capable of carrying out extensive bombardments of surface targets. Virtually nothing about this craft is known, and their only known engagement was in the Battle of Duro, in which they leveled factory complexes on Duro's surface and caused massive chemical spills in the process. As far as we know, the Drop Fighter wasn't used much. Rather, the Confederacy's main bomber was the Hyena-class droid bomber.
Now I'm angry.
Introduced toward the end of 22 BBY, the Hyena-class bomber was heavily based on the Vulture droid. At a glance, it just looked like a scaled-up version of its older cousin. But the Hyena bomber was a much different beast. On top of many less impactful schematic differences, it was much smarter and boasted far more firepower than the Vulture droid, even as it retained some of the Vulture's speed and agility.
I'm not very fast, but
the Hyena bomber was a rare example of a separatist stealth fighter, if a short-range one, meant for carrying out attack runs against hardened targets.
I found
but its design lineage meant it also retained many elements meant for a space superiority role, a deadly combination that made the Hyena a mortal threat to Republic fleet groups. Despite its use of many elements from the Vulture droid, Howard-Chal Engineering actually had no part in the design of the Hyena bomber. Instead, the bomber was designed and manufactured solely by Bactoid Armor Workshop. Bactoid started work on the Hyena bomber early in the Clone Wars, not long after it began producing Vulture droids, which likely gave their engineers the needed experience with Howard-Chal's design in order to build a new starfighter based on it. The resultant starfighter retained the Vulture droid's variable geometry and many of the G-Char's artistic flourishes, but it also incorporated many new features, and Bactoid's own form over function design philosophy showed in the craft's asymmetry and blockier frame. The Hyena bomber shared the same silhouette as the Vulture droid, with differences. Its flat, semicircular main fuselage was broader and sported 2 head sections, plus an underslung bomb bay, while its 4 winglets were much bulkier, split in half in walk mode, and had different lengths.
The thing is, your soul will
portion of the upper winglets being shorter than those of the lower winglets.
Unless I get another.
The Hyena bomber was 12.48 meters long, considerably larger than the Vulture droid. The Hyena bomber had stronger hull plating than the Vulture droid, improving its survivability in firefights, but it still didn't have any shields, meaning that it couldn't afford to take too many hits. The Hyena bomber had the same variable geometry as the Vulture droid, and its flight and attack modes were essentially the same, but the Hyena bomber's walk mode was a little different. When the craft landed, the bomber's winglets legs each split into 2 sections just below the bases of the wings, and the lower portions would extend outwards and upwards in short struts, allowing the Hyena bomber to essentially crouch a little. It was never established why exactly Bactoid implemented this little feature, especially since it seems like it would make the legs weaker and less stable.
They've ruined my run.
Our theory is that it was to lower the droid's main fuselage so that rearmament crews could more easily access the bomb bay. The Clone Wars episode, Liberty on
let's see, will we
supports
get
this, showing that the Hyena Bomber was just short enough in walk mode for B1s to be able to load the bomb bay from the ground. Apart from this little detail, Hyena Bombers operated the same in walk mode as Vulture Droids, and the tips of their legs retained the retractable magnetized claws from their older cousins, allowing them to cling to the hulls of capital ships while awaiting combat. Hyena Bombers in walk mode could function as light walkers, if clumsy and poorly armed ones, allowing them to patrol ground positions if their commanders desired. As a short-range, non-hyperspace capable attack craft, the Hyena Bomber could only carry consumables for up to 48 hours, after which it would have to return to its carrier.
This is where I'm going to find something
Based on the compact nature of its frame, the Hyena Bomber likely relied on power cells rather than an internal reactor like the Vulture Droid, but it's unknown if it also made use of short-lived solid fuel slugs or if it used more conventional.
I mean, at least we've got a nice big radius.
The Hyena was only slightly slower than the Vulture Droid, with a top atmospheric speed of 1,150 kilometers per hour, considerably faster than any other Clone Wars era bomber. The Hyena Bomber was maneuverable as well, and even if it wasn't as nimble as the Vulture Droid, its nature as a droid starfighter enabled it to pull off maneuvers an organic pilot who wouldn't be able to survive, giving it an edge in dogfights. As a droid starfighter, the Hyena Bomber had no cockpit or crew, and it was operated by an integrated droid brain housed in the starfighter's starboard head.
Thank you.
Hyena Bombers had more intelligent droid brains than Vulture droids, as their designers intended to make them more cunning and more capable of making decisions independently than their more simplistic predecessors. This made Hyena Bombers much trickier combatants than Vulture droids, as they were more likely to attempt complex tactics. Though Hyena Bombers likely came with a built-in control signal antenna for maintaining consistent contact with their mothership, they weren't designed to be micromanaged by a central control computer, which meant that they were always able to make the most of their increased intelligence. Apart from the bomber's droid brain, the Hyena Bomber's starboard head also housed a variety of sensor systems, including photoreceptors, which, like on the Vulture droid, sat behind a pair of slit-like red eyeballs. Additional sensor systems were housed in the droid's other head, the main portion of which was located on the underside of the Hyena Bomber's hull. This second head was capable of popping out on a strut while in walk mode, like the main head, and its main feature was a single large camera-like photoreceptor, which was likely a targeting rangefinder meant for use in bombing runs. The weaponry of the Hyena Bomber isn't very consistent across all sources.
That worked out.
It's possible that the droids came in several different weapons configurations. Many sources established that the Hyena Bomber was armed with 4 light laser cannons mounted on the wings, just like the Vulture droid. However, these weapons are absent from most depictions of the craft, including the original model from the Clone Wars. Similarly, while all depictions of the Hyena Bomber clearly show it had a pair of energy torpedo launchers or light laser cannons built into the main fuselage, these aren't listed among the fighter's weapons in any sources. Regardless, the Hyena Bomber was definitely armed with light laser cannons, either 4 on the wings or 2 on the main fuselage, or possibly both. These weapons were roughly as powerful and accurate as the main guns of the Vulture droid, and they allowed the Hyena Bomber to hold its own in dogfights. Sources are more consistent about the Hyena Bomber's ordnance load, fortunately. As a bomber, the Hyena was designed to carry all sorts of heavy ordnance, which were used in assaults on capital ships, bombing runs against surface targets, or on similar missions. Hyena bombers each featured 2 missile launchers and a ventral bomb chute per launcher, and at least 4 bombs at a time. Hyena bombers could be outfitted with proton torpedoes, concussion missiles, or a mix of both, and they usually dropped proton bombs. This gave the Hyena a similar ordnance capacity to the Republic Y-Wing, which allowed a squadron of Hyena bombers to devastate ground targets or outright destroy capital ships. Hyena bombers could be carried into battle by Providence-class carrier/destroyers, and presumably also Lucrehulk-class battleships, and it's possible that, like Vulture droids, they could also hitch rides aboard capital ships that lacked starfighter hangars. It's unknown if they recharged an energized rack suspended from the hangar rafters of their carriers, like Vulture droids did, and in the Clone Wars episode Cat and Mouse, Hyena bombers can be seen grounded like ordinary fighters while dormant, but it's possible that these craft were just on standby, and that Hyena bombers were normally stored and maintained differently. Either way,
really want to
Hyena
fall
bombers
down
were
that hole,
certainly
did we now,
capable of a
Samson?
rapid deployment,
Should we
like
not
their
fall
smaller
down
cousins,
the next hole?
and they were also capable of patrolling the
There
hulls
we
of their
go, well
carriers
done, I
while
did a
awaiting
thing.
action.
Sometimes
Hyena
I do
bombers were
genuinely
typically
wonder
deployed
how I
in
don't
much
fall
smaller
down.
numbers than vulture drones. Separatist carriers usually only had a few squadrons of them.
At least I'm going to get some bombs
Squadrons
out
of Hyena bombers were fairly small and
Got that going
usually
for me.
operated
It's not much,
independently.
but it's something.
Only the most important targets would face more
That's
than
a
one
devil
Hyena
deal.
bomber
I really wish
squadron
I had
at a
got
time.
soul now.
However,
Damn.
even in small numbers, Hyena bombers could
That
make
would
a
be
big
great.
difference.
But
They were
that's fine.
suitable
We've
for a
now
wide
essentially
variety of
opened
roles.
up the secret
Usually,
devil deal.
they functioned as planetary or naval bombers, but their laser cannons and high maneuverability meant they were also capable of dogfighting.
None of them
Hyena
particularly
bombers
useful
could
to me
handle
right now.
any of the roles snub fighters were usually meant for, apart
Bit
from
of a shame.
those that required long-range
unless I just-
operations.
I mean, yeah,
and they
okay,
were
if
both
I
more
die,
maneuverable and packed
when
more
I come back as
firepower
Dark Judas,
than the craft that normally filled those
Babylon
roles.
might be useful,
All
but that's
told,
about
Hyena
it.
bombers could ruin the Loyalists' day in any number of ways,
Right.
and their
So, no, it's
versatility
13
and
by
firepower
13.
were such that they
Don't
were
really
usually
want to go
designated top priority
down
targets
there, so
by
let's
Republic
see what
commanders.
happens if we go.
Fortunately for the Republic, Hyena bombers weren't
There's
nearly
no-
as common as vulture droids,
That's annoying.
though they did
There's
make regular
nothing-
appearances
no,
above the
no red
battlefield of
rooms
the Clone
off
Wars.
this one.
Squadrons of Hyena
what,
bombers
just-
were deployed
just
to
because
pummel
I am
Loyalist
gonna go
ground
and
forces
grab
into submission on Christosis,
the
Ryloth, Malastare, and
Horror
Scipio,
Babylon.
while others fought in naval
Because
battles
screw
above
it.
Celeste, Lola
I mean, if I'm,
and Ring
I'm
of
not
Vinda,
expecting
among
to kill
many others.
myself.
They were a
on
staple
this,
of the
but
Separatist
so
arsenal
if I
throughout
do
the Clone
accidentally
Wars,
die,
sowing terror wherever they went.
then that'll be good.
If you've played the original
Good to
Star
have
Wars
it.
Battlefront 2 though, you might remember
Okay, so
that the
we're gonna open these
Confederacy
up.
made
What
use of
cards have we
another
got here?
bomber class
Death,
during the Clone Wars,
Chaos card, that's
the
good.
Belbulab
Tower,
24 Strike Bomber.
the
This
sun,
was one of a number
Hierophant,
of Belbulab type
Chariot,
ships the Confederacy employed during the Clone Wars, the
Temperance,
most famous of which was the Belbulab 22 Starfighter, the class of General Grievous' personal starfighter, the Soulless one. All of the different Belbulab ships were very similar in most respects,
Soul Hearts.
so we're
Now
going to
we've
discuss
actually
them
got
all
a
at
Horror
once.
Babylon going. So
All
that's
of the
good.
different
Take
Belbulab ships were manufactured by Feather and Otros Scalable Assemblies, a Techno-Union member that had its headquarters on Utapau.
Okay.
Their starfighters often borrowed from Utapauan designs, typically featuring
wanted to
conical
step up and
forward-mounted
use the
sensor
sun. What do I do?
modules,
Failed
swept-back
miserably
designs, and maneuvering fins.
So let's try that.
The
again,
Belbulab
shall
fighters
we?
were no
Without
exception.
flubbing it up.
Their main fuselage was long and bulbous, with the
Right.
cockpit, main
So,
ion drives, and a maneuvering flap at the
sun.
aft end.
We're gonna go into
Toward
a
the
room.
front, two
We're gonna go
long but
the
stubby
sun.
wings stretched out either
And
side,
do a lot of
with
damage to
angular
everybody.
back-swept
Thank you.
nacelles
Dark.
mounted on
Go
the
away.
ends. All told, the Belbulab clocked in at
It's not much,
6.71
really,
meters
in the grand
long,
scheme of
making
things,
it
but
fairly small, even for a starfighter.
I've got
but it
something.
packed a lot into its compact frame.
So let's put a bomb.
The Belbulab fighters were all
Yeah.
designed to be operated by a single living pilot,
go.
though most of the Confederacy's
And
Belbulab
we've got
bombers
loads
were
of keys
instead
anyway, so we
piloted
might
by
as well get
droids.
something out of this guy.
The fighter's cockpit was
Maybe.
mounted at the aft end of the main fuselage, and it
Anything
was
good? You
decently
gonna hand it over?
spacious, equipped with full
Hand over
life
the
support
goodies.
systems for the
What have we
sake
got?
of organic pilots.
A
The
pill. Power
Belbulab
pill.
was operated
Okay,
by a
that's actually
simple
pretty useful.
reinforced control
Might need that.
yoke
I
and
think I'll
triangular
get some benefit
touchscreen
out of the power
panel,
pill.
which most humanoids could operate intuitively.
And
The cockpit
so
didn't
now
have room
got
for any
2
passengers,
out of 3
but it did have
flies.
storage for
One more
160
fly, and then
kilograms
we
of
become
cargo.
Beelzebub.
The Belbulab's
That's
onboard
really
reactor and power converters took
Ooh.
up the front half of the ship's main fuselage,
Now, both of
while the
those
craft's
together
engine
are
systems were located beneath the cockpit
Put a bomb
and within
here.
the large side-mounted nacelles.
And what I'm going to
The
do
Starfighter's
is I'm gonna
main
try and
thrusters
pretend
were a
to
pair of
play.
ion drives
gonna come in
just
here.
aft of the cockpit,
open that
while
up.
each of the
I'm gonna
nacelles
drop
featured a
both
set
of
of
these
auxiliary
trinkets.
thrusters.
Well,
This
trinket
array
and
of
the pill. I'm
engines
gonna
gave
grab
the
flight
Belbulab a top
card.
speed of 1,100 kilometers per hour in atmosphere,
Liz.
allowing it to keep
I can
pace with
use
the
the
Utapauan
flight card
Corax 38
in a
Starfighter.
clever way.
The Starfighter was
Grab
also
that.
quite
I'm gonna grab
maneuverable,
power pill.
owing to a number of little seen features.
Razor blade.
One
Ugh.
was a
Of all the
thrust
items,
vectoring
that would've
fin
been like-
mounted at the very aft
Could have been
end of
so
the ship
useful, but no,
behind the cockpit,
decided to be a
which could
pain in my
adjust the
posterior
trajectory of the main thrust
Well,
streamers.
holy energy.
This fin
Does
was
a thing.
angled upwards to allow the aft landing leg to
Let's open
deploy
that up.
when the Belbulab
And
landed.
you're dead.
The other was 2 large sets of lateral thrust ducts
nothing
built
much
into the
really, is
nacelles,
there? I
which allowed the
really
Belbulab
wish
to
I
make
had some-
extremely sharp turns. This
Something
gave the
I could get
Belbulab
some benefit
agility
from.
comparable to the Confederacy's droid fighters,
any goodies
though,
from you?
of course, it was still
No?
limited by the tolerances of its pilots. The Belbulab's nacelles also
feel
contained
blessed.
repulsor lifts for use in
there's no
takeoffs and
angel
landings,
deals anymore, so that's
as
fine.
well as the
Bit
other
of a waste.
2 of the Starfighter's 3
No, well.
landing legs.
Okay, so there's
unlike the vast majority of the Separatist starfighters, and unlike most Republic starfighters as well, the Belbelub starfighter had an integrated hyperdrive and navi computer which were located forward of the cockpit, sandwiched between the power converters and avionics. Standard Belbelub fighters had measly Class 6 hyperdrives, giving them a short range and slow hyperspace travel speeds, though General Grievous had the Solus 1 upgraded with a top-of-the-line Class 2 hyperdrive, which was much faster and could take the General all across the galaxy. All of these systems took up most of the Belbelub's frame. The main fuselage was almost entirely taken up by the power systems, hyperdrive, cockpit, and engines, while the nacelles were mostly given over to the auxiliary and lateral thrusters. But the Belbelub did have a number of other integrated features. Its nacelles were tipped with large, comprehensive sensor clusters hidden beneath cone-shaped shells, which provided the pilot with a wealth of tactical and astrographical information while in combat, while a powerful shield generator was housed just behind the cockpit above the main thrusters. The Solus 1 was upgraded with highly sophisticated compact HoloNet transceivers. These gave Grievous full access to the Separatist BattleNet, allowing him to monitor and issue orders to CIS forces all over the galaxy. These transceivers were also advanced enough to be able to eavesdrop on loyalist and pirate channels, which helped Grievous avoid battles he couldn't win. The Solus 1 also had built-in sensor jammers, which made it hard for enemy fleets to spot, and doubly hard for Republic forces to listen in on his own communications. On top of its powerful deflector shields, the Belbelub was very heavily armored for such a small and agile craft, with virtually no weak spots in its plating, which enabled even stock Belbelubs to shrug off far more damage than most craft of their size. General Grievous's Solus 1 was even more heavily armored, boasting a thin but extremely durable layer of near impenetrable impervium over its ordinary armor plating, which allowed the Solus 1 to survive a direct hit from anything short of a turbo laser. All Belbelub starfighters were also quite well armed, although their armament differed between the different classes of the fighter. In fact, weaponry seems to have been the sole significant difference between the known Belbelub starfighter classes. Belbelub 22 starfighters, including the Solus 1, which is armed with 2 rapid-firing triple-barreled laser cannons mounted adjacent to the nacelles. These guns were quite powerful, giving their parent craft
we are actually, oh crap, because we picked up the Poe. I forgot that we picked up the turd.
Easily tear through anything that wound up in front of a Belbelub 22. The Belbelub 23 heavy assault craft, a variant of the Belbelub 22, came with heavier weaponry with unknown specifications, while the Belbelub 24 strike bomber was armed with
rare thing to kind of say,
slow-firing laser cannons mounted in the same place as the Belbelub 22's guns, as well as 2 concussion missile launchers and a bomb chute. The Belbelub 24 could carry a total of 12 concussion missiles per launcher, as well as an unknown number of
a lot of the fly items are a bit.
This would give the Belbelub 24 a similar ordnance load to the Belbelub 22, 23, and 24 starfighters all saw use in the CIS Navy over the course of the Clone Wars, mostly during the later stages of the conflict, though they weren't nearly as common as many of the Confederacy's
I can now fly, for I am
All 3 were dedicated snub fighters capable of long-range deployment, though they filled slightly different niches.
Okay, so
the
there
Belbelub 22 was more a general-purpose attack craft, capable of dogfighting, punching holes in enemy fighter screens, and attacking lighter enemy capital ships. It functioned similarly to the Republic Arc-170, but it was seemingly used far less. The Belbelub 24, meanwhile, was a dedicated bomber intended pretty much exclusively for attack runs against capital ships, and it was likely deployed mostly for missions the Hyena bomber was too lightly armored to pull off. The Belbelub 23's exact role is unknown. Belbelubs were typically carried into battle by Providence-class carrier/destroyers, but their hyperdrives meant they could also operate independently on long-range missions, though the Confederacy rarely used its starfighters in this manner. It's unknown when exactly these craft started to see use in Separatist fighter wings, with the exception of the Solus 1. However, they seem to have only started seeing extensive use during the Outer Rim sieges. The only known engagement of stock Belbelub 22s, for instance, was in the Battle of Calamordia, in which large numbers of the craft participated. However, enough Belbelab 22
but at the same time, I would like
to
to
become
make
popular
myself
among
as
private
killer as
owners
possible. I
and
do
early
need to
rebel
take
cells
that
after
red
Clone Wars,
damage.
so this was almost definitely not their only
That would be
engagement.
the best thing.
Belbelab 24s, meanwhile, seem to have been fairly common during the Outer Rim sieges, outright usurping the Hyena Bomber's place in separate starfighter lineups in some fleets. For the most part though, most records of Belbelab starfighters in action concerned General Grievous's Soulless One. Grievous used this ship to travel between the many different fleets and strongholds he had spread across the galaxy, as well as to flee battles that weren't going his way.
Bang!
He also occasionally used the Soulless One for its intended purpose, leading Separatist fighter wings into battle and dogfighting with Jedi pilots. Grievous usually had the Soulless One maintained either on his flagship, the Invisible Hand, or at his fortress on the third moon of a sec, and he usually flew alongside a squadron known as Escort Flight, which consisted of Rogue-class starfighters operated by the Confederacy's most elite Magna Guard pilots. Grievous took possession of the Soulless One before the start of the Clone Wars, as he used the ship to escape Geonosis during the first battle of the conflict. The starfighter made sporadic appearances throughout the war, and Grievous last used it to travel to Utapau, which he conquered for use as a hiding place for the Separatist Council toward the end of the war. During the Battle of Utapau, Grievous attempted to flee to the Soulless One and escape, only to be killed mere meters from his starfighter by Obi-Wan Kenobi, who later commandeered the ship to escape the planet himself. The Belbelab was a bit of an anomaly among Separatist starfighters. It fit in with the Republic's fighter doctrine, with its emphasis on durable long-range snubfighters more than it did with the Confederacy's short-range interceptor swarm model. But it wasn't the only such fighter in the Separatist arsenal. The Rogue
again, I should have paid a little bit more attention to how much charge
this craft,
my
which
red
you might
key
remember
had,
from Star Wars The Clone Wars, is actually an
efficiently.
knockoff of a more obscure Powan starfighter class, the Porax 38 starfighter, which can very briefly be seen in Revenge of the Sith. The Porax 38 was designed and built by Bupa Torskill Abbey Devices, an Utapauan starship manufacturer, for the use of Utapau's local
I'd have a bit of a love for all the tech items.
It was intended to be the main component of Utapau's space
and although Tech Point 5 isn't
similar to the Naboo N1 starfighter,
much to write home about,
Utapauans only had a handful of small capital ships due to Trade Federation arms and
especially if you don't have
the Porax 38 was the primary fighter class of Utapau's rugged starfighter force, and it was designed to be versatile and independent, a long-range snubfighter capable of operating all across the sector. It was well-armed, tough and reliable, and though Porax 38s were rarely seen out of the Toronto sector, they had enough of a reputation that General Grievous became familiar with them around the start of the Clone Wars. Grievous, who apparently had an appreciation for Utapauan starfighter design, believed that long-range snub fighters like the Porax 38 and the Belbelab 22 were the future of space-based warfare, and at the start of the Clone Wars, he had several Porax 38s stolen and reverse engineered. The stolen fighters were handed off to Bactoid Armor Workshop, which ultimately adapted the design
I saw them being all confused by my existence.
The Rogue was pretty much the same as the Porax 38. Bactoid mainly just upgraded the Navi computer for galaxy-wide operations and tweaked the cockpit so that non-Utai had an easier time piloting the craft. Consequently, all the stats we're about to mention apply to both starfighters unless stated otherwise. The Rogue class starfighter consisted of a wide and mostly flat wing section tipped with laser cannons, a bulbous cockpit module at the wing's midpoint, and two long torpedo-like nacelles close to either end of the wing, the latter of which made up the majority of the fighter's bulk. The fighter was 12.7 meters long and 12.88 meters wide, and it had a unique dual-reactor design. Each of the Rogue's nacelles contained one of the fighter's two hypermatter annihilation reactors, which, together with the fighter's fuel tanks, made up the middle portion of each nacelle.
Well, we found the red
room in tandem to power the fighter. At the aft end of the nacelles were the Rogue's ion engines, which were flanked by a pair of high-capacity heat exchanger pods. Each nacelle contained a single main ion thruster, but each ion engine also featured a series of dorsal and ventral thruster branch vents, which could redirect thrust up or down for pitch maneuvers. All of these thruster apertures were fairly small, but this belied the sheer power of the Rogue's engines, which could propel the fighter at speeds of up to 1,200 kilometers per hour in atmosphere and accelerate the craft at up to 3,300 Gs in open space. The Rogue's thruster branch vents also made it highly maneuverable, much like the Belbelab. Like the original Porax 38, the Rogue-class starfighter was also equipped with hyperdrive and onboard navi computer, which were located behind the cockpit.
I should have paid attention.
The P-38 had a Class 2 hyperdrive with a 3,000 light-year effective range.
Beelzebub, we've got all the fly.
Apart from these basic attributes, the Rogue-class starfighter was packed full of additional features, which were meant to help it undertake missions without the assistance of a larger carrier. The Rogue-class starfighter was armed with 2 wing-mounted, fire-linked heavy laser cannons. These had a high yield and a fairly high rate of fire, and they could shred a small freighter in a matter of minutes.
It can do something.
Each of the starfighter's nacelles was tipped with a pair of sensor clusters.
I might use some bombs as a general
These sensor systems were extremely advanced and had a long range, providing the pilot with detailed information about their surroundings and any approaching craft.
And of course, sticking
the
this
front
close
ends
to
of the nacelles also
good old Mega
contained
Satan does mean
rangefinders
I
to
get to
improve targeting accuracy, long-range communication systems, data buffers, and high-power signal jammers that interfered with enemy craft's targeting systems, sensors, and communications. All systems that helped the Rogue survive independent missions deep in
the bot fly is
hostile
getting in the
territory.
way and just being useful.
Additional gadgets were built
as
into
is
the
its
wings,
role,
inclling repulsor lift coils to assist
and with a
in
lock of
takeoffs
4,
and landings,
we're not like throwing out
inertial
every
compensators,
shot is a
highly efficient power distributors,
is a
and
flame,
high
but we're
capacity
getting quite few.
the Rogue's shields were above average for a fighter of its size, and it had decent armor plating as well, allowing it to survive engagements lesser craft would be unable to.
So,
in keeping with its long-range mission profile, the fighter's consumables could last up to 20 days. The Rogue-class starfighter, like the P-38, was designed to be operated by a single pilot seated in a central
radius
cockpit.
damage is just doing
The Rogue had a larger cockpit than the Porax 38, enabling non-Utide to pilot it. However, this cockpit was still too small for passengers. Rogue-class starfighters were often piloted by IG-100 Magna Guards. Despite this, they retained the P-38's onboard life support systems, allowing organic pilots to operate Rogue-class fighters instead.
The bot fly
All told, the Rogue-class starfighter was one of the most deadly starfighters in the
which is great, and if I don't even hit the target
on par with the Republic
still get
Arc
rid of it.
170.
Because I'll just keep flinging out the ghosts.
This craft could both soak up and dish out quite a bit of punishment, and their hyperdrives, powerful sensors, and jamming systems allowed them to operate independently at long range.
There we go. Victory is mine. If you have enjoyed today's daily run of Samson, please do like, share, and subscribe. Comments are always great. We also perform well in a conventional respond to all of them. But hopefully, I'll catch you all again on the next Binding of Isaac daily run. We ranked 418. That's not too bad. But I didn't do any of the extra bits. I wasn't trying. I should have tried. But like I say, hopefully I'll catch you all again the next time the Walrus plays the Binding of Isaac's daily run.